And we are live.
Yes.
So cool. So I'm really excited for today's show. We got two very special guests on with us today. We got Rem Bauman and we've got Will Koplitz joining us to talk about Graviton 2. And I guess just to kind of kick things off, we're filling in for Steph and for Alex this week. And today's show is, the keys to AWS optimization, which is a show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock cost optimization at AWS. So I'm John Massey, part of the optics team here at AWS. Been working here for about 2 years, and we're joined by our two special guests that we've got to talk about Graviton 2. So I'm going to pass it over to Will if you want to give kind of a quick background on yourself and a little bit of an origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Will Koplitz. First of all, I'm stoked to be on the show. This is great. Thanks for having me on. I am a specialist solutions architect focusing on Graviton and helping ISVs, so independent software vendors, to move their applications to Graviton to leverage some of the benefits of moving to the ARM architecture. Been at AWS for 10 months now, so it's pretty new. But I've been working with AWS for about 10 years, so I'm pretty familiar with the playing field, even though I haven't been on the team very long. So, yeah, thanks for having me on the show. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Will. And Rem, I'll kind of pass it over to you, and if you want to give like a quick background on yourself and kind of what you're doing on the optics team.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rem Bauman, I'm a commercial architect, same team as John with optics. I've been with AWS for 3 years. I started out in our professional services group, working with some of our largest telco customers. I've been now with optics for about a year as a commercial architect, and I work with our media and entertainment customers. First time on the show, so very excited to be here, talking with you, Will and John, and I hope we can keep it amicable after the absolute beatdown I gave you this week in our fantasy football league.
Yeah.
Nothing personal here. This is all
Yeah.
business.
Exactly. Well, we got a couple more weeks left ahead of us, but I'm not sure I'm going to dig myself out of the position that I've got myself in so far. So we'll see where it goes. And I guess to kind of kick things off, we're going to talk through a couple different things today. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have Rem on was to talk about a new lab that came out as part of the well-architected labs that goes in specifically to looking at Graviton 2 opportunities within your own footprint within RDS. And that's going to be kind of like a more tactical way to look at like opportunities that you have within your environment, based on your own current usage. But I think maybe we want to like take a step back before we get to that level and look at like, hey, what is Graviton 2? And Will, you want to kind of kick us off there and just give a little bit of the background?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, much to the chagrin of my family and friends. Graviton 2. So taking a step back, I mean, Amazon is a lot of things to a lot of different people. I mean, it's trucks on the road delivering packages, it's AWS services, but we also have designed and built our own processing chip. So a lot of people don't really think of AWS or Amazon as a chip company, but in fact we are. We have a processor that's an ARM-based chip running the Neoverse core, and it is born in the cloud. So as opposed to having a chip that's been migrated to adapt to web cloud-based workloads, instead, this was designed with the cloud in mind. So there's some amazing benefits to it. I mean, the shortest way of saying it is that it is faster, it is cheaper, and it is more sustainable. It's 60% more power efficient than using x86 chips to do your same workloads. So a Graviton instance is a really easy way to lower your AWS bill by 20% as compared to an x86 instance. And it's also the greenest choice we have right now if you're running cloud-based workloads. So we've got 3 iterations. The first was in 2018. Second was Graviton 2 was 2019. And 2021, we came out with Graviton 3, which has just been fully released as a C7G instance that you can launch today.
Very cool. And you did the under the hood chat about those C7G instances, right, Will?
I did, yeah.
We went. I was just gonna say I'm gonna put that one in the in our chat over here, so folks can kind of take a look at that if they want to dive in a little bit deeper on it.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, for sure.
Quick question for you, Will. I mean, obviously, this shows all around keys to optimization and lowering your price. I think one of the interesting things about Graviton is we talk a lot in price performance, and how both price and performance is a huge indicator there. So could you maybe talk about like how both of those aspects play into how customers can save money with Graviton?
Yeah, so there's because Graviton is actually physical cores on the processing chip, it doesn't use hyper-threading. So as a lot of workloads that use hyper-threading and x86 instances, when they hit about 60% CPU utilization, the throughput begins to really tail off because of contention on the cores. Graviton, being virtual or physical cores instead of virtual, can scale much higher. So you can run workloads a lot hotter, I guess you could say, and at higher CPU without a performance degradation. So in addition to just being basically 20% cheaper to run off the rip when you launch the instance, it also scales higher as well. So you can use fewer instances as well as using cheaper instances to do the same amount of work.
And that's a good point too. I mean, so you're getting a 20% savings off of the run rate cost for the instances compared to most of the Intel equivalents, but that's not where the savings would necessarily stop there.
That's right. That's where the saving begins, by all means. But when you really start to become use a more high performance workload, that's when the savings is additive as well onto that. So you can. There's a number of customers who have not only launched these cheaper instances, the Graviton instances, but have now started running fewer instances in total because it can handle a higher workload.
Got it. Okay, very very cool. And we had a question from someone that we were talking to at one point. We're like, hey, this savings on this, is this because it's part of like a promotional price, and that's kind of subject to change, but from what you're saying, this is we're talking about a couple different savings dimensions here, and that's not one of them, right?
No. This isn't something that we're going to raise the prices on by any means. I mean, Amazon has a long history of lowering prices. So the goal with each iteration of Graviton is to increase the performance and keep the price lower than a comparable instance that isn't running the Graviton chip. So there is actually, you can launch, there's a 750-hour free tier for, I believe it's T4G instances that you can experiment with. So that is one area where it is, the price is a deal, as you would say. But in general, those prices aren't going up for the Graviton instances. They're going to remain cheaper than x86.
Cool. And Rem and I were talking kind of before the show too. I mean, about like some of the places that folks maybe are already, working with ARM-based processors, and maybe you're using it your laptop or your phones, and I think folks that have started to use some of those devices, I know I was this way when I got my laptop with an ARM-based processor. Like the battery life is like unbelievable. This thing it goes forever. So yeah, I mean, if you pass that on to your workloads that you're running on AWS, there's going to be a material savings.
Right. Not only does the battery last longer, but you can actually leave it on your lap without worrying about cooking yourself as well.
Yeah.
So it runs cooler as well as longer.
And that's you could feel that in the real world too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the other pieces too, so we talk about like the 20% savings number, and probably good to go back and say like that's really a savings estimate that is mostly applicable for EC2. It might be a different savings estimate if we're looking at the managed services, right?
Correct. Yeah, it does vary depending on the different managed services that you're using. It is for all cases it's a price decrease to use Graviton, but that was mostly about EC2. Correct.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
And as we're kind of going into this next place where I think we wanted to talk a little bit about like managed services and the stuff Rem had been working on to help folks drive some of that adoption in managed services. I'm just kind of curious from folks that maybe are joining the show today, if anyone's using Graviton 2 now, what have your experiences been, or has this been a topic of interest that maybe folks have started to explore and it's maybe on a roadmap for like the next year. We've heard that from a lot of different customers that they're looking for that like entry point. Like how do I get started? Is it looking at a specific workload, or is it looking at using a managed service? So maybe before we jump into like that piece around the lab, I'm kind of curious from you all. What have you seen that's like a good way to sort of get started with it, or even just to sort of wrap your head around like getting started with Graviton too?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to get started is by swapping managed services for Graviton, especially RDS, the relational database service. That can be done basically on the fly without taking down your database. You can move from one instance type to another, from x86 to Graviton. Elasticache is another example where the transition is very seamless. And we've got plenty of documentation on how to do that. And Lambda as well. So when you're launching a Lambda function, you can choose what type of processor you want to run it on, whether it's Graviton or x86 as well.
Yeah. I was going to say OpenSearch is another one that I think is super straightforward, where, again, it's just based on the version number that you're running. As long as you meet the requirements, you can just move those over very seamlessly.
One of the things we've already seen with some customers is like, yeah, we really want to start adopting Graviton too. And then we'll look at their usage and be like, did you know you're already using this today? So like, yeah, like a service like Elasticache where it's the new default for that,
Right.
Sometimes they're like, I didn't even know, because it some of those cases, it's just so easy to adopt it. And I was going to put a link in here for the GitHub repo that has some of those getting started tools. What might folks find on that, Will, as I guess like a collection of resources? What can they expect from that?
Yeah, so it started off as a getting started guide with kind of an intro to Graviton and what it is, but this repo has really evolved into just a technical guide. I mean, it can go from what languages are the easiest to move to Graviton, and typically those are things like Java or Python or Node, and how to migrate them, as well as performance tuning to make sure that you're getting the most benefit that you can out of Graviton once you've migrated an application. And in addition, there's talk about RDS or OpenSearch as well that you can experiment with and find the resources there to let you but dip your toe in the water.
Cool. So that's not just for EC2. Then there's other resources folks can kind of tap into.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically the easiest way to do it is to use your search engine of choice to find what service you're looking to move to Graviton, and that is a bit more EC2 focused, but there are some other resources as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so Rem, I want to kind of like pass over to you too and talk a little bit about the lab and like, what does it do? How can folks use that? And if they're interested in getting started and using managed services as that entry point, what can they kind of expect from that resource?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I think that managed services is usually the easiest way to start to dip your toe into Graviton. And as you said, a lot of customers don't even know that they're using so much Graviton, with things like Elasticache now being the default. But for some of these managed services, it's really easy. We mentioned that for Elasticache, OpenSearch, and RDS, it's just a matter of you meeting the correct version number. There's a little bit more to it in RDS, where you also have to be running either the correct database engine, either MariaDB, Postgres, or MySQL. And so this is a new capability that we added to the optimization data collector as a part of the well-architected labs. And what this will do is it will analyze your CloudWatch metrics. It does some parsing of both your database engine and your version number. And then it has some logic that's a part of that will go in and tell you your Graviton eligibility based on your database engine. Then it looks at your version number to tell you if you require any version updates. And then we do a bunch of price comparisons. So what are you running now versus what would you run on Graviton? And what would be your estimated savings just per unit cost? We also do some extrapolations for your monthly savings and annual savings if you were to leave that instance running. So it's a great way to just get a snapshot of your current usage and what that could look like if you moved over to Graviton. It's really easy to deploy. Everything is just via CloudFormation templates. If you already have it deployed into your environment, the optimization data collector, all you need to do is just run an update on your CloudFormation stack, and it will automatically bring in all of the queries that are necessary to do this and some of the mapping tables. And then it's just an easy view in Athena. You can go and make visualizations like with that on QuickSight, or send exports to your teams to help instruct them on how to do those upgrades.
That's awesome. So someone can just run this against their own usage and say, hey, I got a whole ton of RDS out there. This will go through and kind of qualify out the running instances that they have today and say, hey, these are on a supported database engine that is eligible for Graviton2. And then you may or may not need to do an update to it. And you can find out from that list which ones are immediately ready to kind of like toggle over in a maintenance window, and then which ones they probably need to, look at what the upgrade path is for that, but don't need to make any other heavy lift changes, just normal type of update type stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think people in our role, John, we're always looking for these quick hits. And I feel like some of these managed service Graviton adoptions is one of those. Will, you mentioned earlier, is that you can do some of these upgrades in place. If you have multi-AZ databases, you can do this without even any downtime, where you do it to your read replica and then you swap over that to your writer. And so this is a great way, whether you're in a FinOps group looking to identify places for optimization, or whether you're hands-on keyboard as a DevOps engineer looking for ways to make your environment more cost efficient. Really easy way to just get resource level granularity and find which one of those databases could move over to Graviton.
Cool. And I wanted to like click into something you mentioned there too, Rem. So like if I've got like a read replica, I can just take the read replica, use that as a starting point, convert that over to Graviton2, and run that like multi-architecture with like x86 based on the primary copy of the RDS instance, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's also a great way to start experimenting and start to see some of those price performance efficiencies. I mentioned that the module will have some of those price as potential savings listed there. But that's a great way for you to see it in action. Just have it on your reader. It's not too much risk. You can do that in a test environment as well. So it's a great way to just dip your toes in and do actual testing to see the benefits for yourself in your own environment.
That's cool. I think one of the neat things, I was just gonna go ahead, Will.
I was just gonna say, I mean,
yeah.
like this is, I think we're kind of missing, like, before starting at Amazon, I was working for myself as a consultant, and this is one way to walk in if you're working for a company that's spending a lot on RDS and say, oh, by the way, I just saved us 20% on our RDS spend for perpetuity, and it took me like an hour and a half. Like there's definitely like some personal benefits as well to doing this, as opposed to just like general corporate benefits. Like that's a guy you want to keep around, is the one who, or gal, or the person who has lowered their RDS spend by 20% on their own volition as well. So yeah, I just like to point out like kind of what's in it for me for doing this. Like that's pretty substantial savings for a couple hours worth of work. So.
Yeah, I mean and then to be able to like understand what the scope is, kind of build a plan, very, very easily, know what those steps are, and then maybe you could take that and start to scale that into some of those like bigger use cases, bring it back over to EC2 Next.
Yeah.
I think that was like kind of the next place we're going to, is like, I like that idea of like the multi-architecture with like RDS, because then you can actually evaluate what that price performance gain is by looking at your own utilization and your own data as kind of the benchmark for that, right? Mm-hmm. And that's maybe like an easy way to think about it with RDS. If I've got a read replica, I can switch that over and I can actually see if it's running cooler. How much cooler is it running? Can I adjust the vertical scaling of it? I'm curious, Will, if you can go into some detail on like the EC2 side of things. Like, how would someone do something similar on the EC2 side with like getting started, assessing the performance benefits, multi-architecture type stuff, all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, if first of all, the kind of key principles before you do this is operating systems that are the most current take the most advantage of the ARM architecture. So if you're running a super old version of Ubuntu, it's worth it to upgrade your operating system version and whatever your runtime is, if it's Python or Java, to the most current version possible, because the current code just runs better. The second core principle is to test this stuff, right? You don't want to, first of all, you don't want to just convert your production and just, pray. You want to take a dev or a test workload and actually really test it when you do this. So one way of doing that would be to be running in multi-architecture. And for example, like you were talking about, REM, have a RDS replica. But for EC2, one of the ways would be to add it to an auto-scaling group, to add a Graviton instance that's been tested and make sure that it runs. And then you can monitor it in real time in a dev environment to see how it's handling it. And testing isn't always the funnest thing to do. I mean, we always, like as a developer, it's usually last on my list, but in this case, testing is really important to see how the actual application performs. Downloading a test suite and trying it is going to give you some metrics, but really each application is different, and it's best to test that application's code on Graviton as well.
Yeah, I like all those call outs. And you were talking about this kind of as I'm reading this question that came through. Are there specific types of workloads that may work better with Graviton? Any way to kind of determine that? And just kind of curious in your take on that one.
Yeah, so a lot of that stuff is in that link to the Getting Started guide that talks about it. So basically, runtime languages, Java is great, especially. I mean, we have our own JDK called Corretto. It's based off the OpenJDK, which is tuned specifically for Graviton as well. So Java is a great place to start. Python, Node.js as well. These are all supported. Go, Rust is significantly faster on Graviton as well. There's been some really good white papers written about that. So those are the best places to start. If you've got very low level C code, it's a bit more tricky. It's not impossible, but you do have to change some compilation flags when you're compiling your application. And currently, Windows does not have an ARM-based version that they're vending. So that's one area that we're still waiting on, and hopefully that'll be coming along sooner than later.
Cool. And this was kind of reminding me too of something, Rem, you had mentioned earlier about a cool customer use case where you'd help them kind of modify some golden images that they had in a repo that maybe they were using for multi-architecture stuff. So I'm kind of curious, if you could go into a little bit of detail on that. But the other thing I'm hearing is beyond just the language of this, maybe there's some architectural stuff that could clue you in on good workloads to start to target. Is it containerized? Is it something that's elastic? So I'm curious if you could kind of talk about those two things, one, that customer example that you mentioned a little bit, and also any other little things that could be breadcrumbs or clues that this is a good workload to invest your time on modernizing with Graviton too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back a little bit to the question we were working with one of my media and entertainment customers, trying to identify where are some places that we could start experimenting with Graviton. Two of the big areas that we very commonly see is within analytics, and then also just microservices and containers. So with this particular customer, after having some discussions, they had this analytics workload that they have been working on ramping up. It was going to be actually taking on some more workloads from some new applications that they took on. And so they wanted to start to experiment. So one of the things that we did is we helped them just to create a golden image. And this would allow their developers to have an approved image that they knew worked with their applications that they could start experimenting with. We just put that image into Elastic Container Registry, and that allowed any of their developers to take that down, start experimenting with it. Then this was also just a small pocket of the business. They published that container golden image to other parts of the business that I know are looking to expand. They have a lot of container orchestration that goes on throughout their entire business. And so we've gradually seen their Graviton usage start to increase. They've been gradually moving more and more of some of their test workloads over, looking to move some of their larger scale production workloads over, hopefully this year.
That's super cool. So the golden image, is that basically that's kind of a clean slate, a blank canvas that folks could deploy and then they'll have enough there to kind of bootstrap and get something up and running on Graviton too, and then they can run whatever they want on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of went through the list of dependencies that they were using for that app, made sure that they had all versions that were compatible with ARM. And so that was really the cleanup process that they went and created and published to make it easy for a developer to just pick that up and start using for any of their apps.
And I think one of the other things that we were talking about too was going through, and once you have that running, like what is the performance I'm getting? Is this how does this compare to maybe what I'm familiar with other workloads? Like Will, Rem, anything that you have as far as like metrics that folks should be analyzing? I'm kind of curious what you think about that. We're running a workload. What should they look at?
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, like that's one of those areas where we really recommend that you test your workload, right? I mean, I have seen tests. I mean, just yesterday, I mentioned Windows doesn't bend for ARM yet, but .NET Core does run on Graviton. And I was just looking yesterday at an example where it was 20% faster, as well as 20% cheaper to run it on Graviton. So again, it depends on the workload. Unfortunately, that's like the worst answer to give. Like it depends, but it really does. I mean, if it's the thing to do is just send it. Give it a shot, push it out there, and see what happens. But there's the majority of workloads will run faster.
Cool. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ren.
I was going to say from that exact example with the M&E customer. I mean, one of the biggest metrics that we were looking at was CPU utilization. Well, you were mentioning that this is going to be more efficient. They were able to run these a lot hotter than some of the x86 based instances. And then another metric that we looked at was just instance hours. This was all just a lot of data processing. And so their instance hours dramatically dropped for analyzing the same volume of data sets. And so again, we talk about price benefits in terms of both just the cost reduction of 20%, but also the price performance increases. So they're running just less instance hours, and that's obviously going to lead to savings.
Cool. So I think the other thing I'm hearing too is, depending on what you're doing, the metrics you're going to analyze are going to be a little bit different. There might be some common ones like how hot is it running? What's the CPU utilization look like? Then there's going to be whatever your app is doing, like, am I processing stuff faster? What's the time to get the jobs done? And then I think that's a cool one to look at too, is just overall hours. If this is running in like an auto scaling group, am I reducing the amount of hours that we have?
And another fun thing to do, John, is to push them until they break, right? See how far you can take these instances before they start timing out on requests and stuff like that. So just really, load testing and pushing them as hard as they'll go. And it's surprising how much better Graviton does and how much more it can handle before it starts, throwing up. So
yeah, I like that. I like that call out, and I put a link in here too. I mean, I think having like references from other customers and kind of hearing how folks do stuff. This one's from maybe 2 years ago now, from Snap Inc., their Graviton 2 adoption, where they called out a lot of the stuff I think you just mentioned, Will, around running those performance tests, seeing how hard they could push that. What was the output of doing the stress testing? And they share some of their findings. So it's kind of a cool reference if folks are looking for more detail. And knowing that we've got about a minute left, I'm curious if both of y'all have a like a parting note on like something someone should do to like take some action maybe after they've watched our show today. What would you recommend someone does as kind of like a must do next step?
Well, I'll go first. I think just send it, give it a shot. Launch one of the instances that are in our free tier. Install your application, see if it compiles, and really just give it a shot and kick the tires. In addition to just the price performance and the cost, the sustainability is another important reason to just give this a shot and see how it works. So yeah, just go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to echo that, just start to dip your toes in. As we were mentioning earlier, managed services can be a really easy gateway into starting with Graviton. And as Will was mentioning, you can be an absolute superhero for your org for your resume, just getting a lot of those cost savings and efficiency gains. And that's an easy way to start.
Yeah. And Rem, with your tool, I mean, moving to RDS, it's, I mean, you showed it to me yesterday.
No-brainer.
It's a no-brainer. Yeah. I mean, that's a really great way to start saving money for your org. So
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Will, Rem, thank you guys very much for joining us today. And next week, we've got John Meyer on the show talking about cloud costs back with Steph. So thanks again for joining us, and hope to have you back soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Bye.
Thanks, Will.